Welcome to 2004, the year when everyone learned that a certain country was invaded by a certain other country, a coalition you could say, just the year before without any actual cause. The year that gave us the first confirmed unarmed aerial drone kills, when Hurricane Jean killed over 3,000 people in Haiti, when over 1,000 people, mostly children, were taken captives by terrorists in North Ossetia, and probably worst of all, when MySpace and Facebook were open to the public. Gmail became a thing, requiring people to actually get invites to use it back then. Ubuntu was first released, Firefox came out. The web jumped to interactivity as its next level, to user-created content, to 2.0. And somewhere out in space, the Cassini-Huygens orbiter and probe brought us the first close-up glimpse at Saturn's rings. While back on Earth, we even found what seemed to be a new species of human that never made it past the Stone Age. It would be called Homo floresiensis. Moving to the realm of video games, we were at the point in time when video game consoles were nearing the end of another generation, at least when it came to handhelds. As Sony released the PlayStation Portable, a system with nearly the power of a PlayStation 2 in your hands. It would be very successful over the next decade, but not as much as Nintendo's new money printing machine, the DS. A callback to its dual-screen Game & Watch from the 1980s that proved that there was an area where Nintendo could progressively be more successful. Because in the home console market, things were not looking great. The GameCube was barely 3 years old, and a replacement was already planned, as it had announced a revolution. One that would not see the light of day for a few years, but seemed to be a departure from what we usually have in terms of console generations. The other ones, however, were still doing well enough. The original Xbox received Halo 2, the most successful game on the platform, thanks in no small part to its outstanding multiplayer and in a tiny part to its half-finished campaign that left people wanting to finish the fight for years. Microsoft's console also received Fable, one of Peter Molyneux's most touted creations, a game that promised the world and delivered somewhat less than that, but it was still well loved enough to start a franchise in its own right, and some would call it one of the main reasons why RPG dialogue went downhill, since it didn't have any actual dialogue that you as a character could use, just emotes and farts, which, let's face it, is what we have today. But in terms of consoles, the PlayStation 2 still absolutely ruled. It dominated at a level unparalleled before this, with games like the, some would say, unsurpassed Spider-Man 2, proof that there can be movie adaptations that are fabulous. There have been quite a many of them actually, but people just tend to ignore them. And we had Metal Gear Solid 3, not just the sequel, but the sequel that everyone unanimously loved, with a different yet familiar main character, the genetic father of Solid Snake, Naked Snake, Big Boss himself, cracking jokes, eating frogs, and sneaking through a wonderfully crafted succession of levels that allowed a high degree of freedom when approaching targets. It was masterfully open-ended in pretty much all of its aspects, and it featured something truly rare: common sense. But in terms of success, there were only 3 games worth mentioning in 2004. One of them was a PlayStation 2 exclusive, at least for 1 year, in which it sold 12 million copies for the PlayStation 2, becoming a monster hit in its lifetime. That game was Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, an evolution of the series that put the biggest focus on story that the franchise had ever seen up to that point, as well as bringing in the largest variety of gameplay that the series has seen to date, honestly. It even added RPG elements, so you could get strong or fat or better at driving or better at flying, and it is still, even now, the most quotable title in the series. Some would say that San Andreas hasn't hasn't been outdone yet in the sheer amount of freedom it gave you and stuff to do that wasn't yoga. And in terms of multiplayer, it did not have any per se, but the community did make San Andreas multiplayer, which is still, in 2018, a much better multiplayer mode than the official one made by Rockstar for Grand Theft Auto 5. One of the other best-selling games of the year was The Sims 2, a game that took many of the ideas of the first one, reduced them to zero to begin again, driving an expansion-fueled profit machine that forgot about its satirical origins and just fully embraced rampant consumerism for fun and profit, mostly profit a lot of it. And of course, there was the other great seller of its time, a game that, well, it's probably the most profitable video game in the history of the human race. Now, I don't have exact numbers to back this up, but I doubt that a single other game comes close. Blizzard released World of Warcraft in 2004, a game that fundamentally changed the MMO genre. Up until then, there were a few successful ones, but when this hit, there was no comparison. It didn't matter that EverQuest 2 was just released that very year or that Metin 2 came out, though a lot of Romanians probably played more of Metin 2 than they did WoW. When World of Warcraft hit, everyone bought it and everyone played it and kept paying the monthly subscription for over a decade. It eclipsed anything before it and everything since it. And it did this through sheer approachability. Without an interface, it takes up half the screen by default. You can add it if you want to be a total tryhard, sure, but it's friendlier, with no strange button combinations needed, with no daft rule system, and very easy to understand basic ideas and mechanics. Sadly, it also meant it was a bit more limited. It was simplified even compared to EverQuest, let alone something like the sandbox wonder that was Ultima Online. But it made up for its limitations with a great presentation, great style, great cinematics, and the connection to one of the best RTS franchises currently on the market. As it continued to expand, World of Warcraft would break record after record and effectively kill the MMO genre. It became the MMO genre. All games that would come after it would try to be it and fail. Even those already released were trying to emulate it with disastrous consequences, as Star Wars Galaxy's players would find out in just a few months. A lot of games were still trying to find their footing in this new world. A Bard's Tale returned from in exile actually, with The Bard's Tale, a comedic spoof of the RPG genre that didn't have so much to do with the original series but worked surprisingly well. Leisure Suit Larry, on the other hand, came out with an awful attempt at reviving the Sierra Online classic in the form of Magna Cum Laude. Fallout tried to turn into a console game with Brotherhood of Steel, much like Baldur's Gate had already done with Dark Alliance, and sort of became the Fallout game we never speak of. Thief, Deadly Shadows tried to become a third-person action game, and it sort of half managed to. But if we're talking sequels, we did have that year the rushed, unfinished and yet fantastic Knights of the Old Republic 2, a game with a story that still puts every other Star Wars property to shame, possibly minus the original 3 Thrawn books, but basically every movie ever made and every other video game. And that year we also got Need for Speed Underground 2 with its open world racing and magnificent car customization, though it was far from being the only great car game of the year. We also got Flat Out with its arcadey goodness, and the rally simulator Richard Burns Rally, which some people still call the finest of its species ever made. Then came the great combo of Unreal 2 and Unreal Tournament 2004, which was sort of an apology for 2003, which came out in 2002. And it was a truly great multiplayer shooter with so many features to it that you'd have fun playing it alone. Unlike Counter-Strike Source, a sequel to Counter-Strike released that year that was just for the multiplayer created. But if you did want some single player, there was the troubled single player counterpart, in the form of Condition Zero, a game that was stuck in development hell and went through, I think, 3 or 4 versions before they decided on one of them. But if you really wanted a first-person shooter that was not Halo 2, you had some great options this year. One of them was the return of the Mac Daddy of the series. Doom 3 tried to modernize the series by making it more serious, more grounded, grittier, darker. It mostly succeeded at annoying people with total darkness and monster closets, and your character's inability to tape a flashlight to a gun. It was still a successful game and a lot of people appreciated it, but it sort of missed the essence of what it used to be. And what it became didn't really gel well, unlike what Wolfenstein became with Return to Castle Wolfenstein. The role that Doom used to occupy was now being taken by that year's Painkiller or Serious Sam The Second Encounter. People that wanted a bit more freedom and more open space in their FPS would have Far Cry, a distant shout, if you will, from Doom 3's constant darkness and the game that put Crytek on the map for the first time. Even the Vin Diesel video game, The Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay, managed to do darkness somewhat better than Doom 3 by actually having you be able to see in the darkness. And if you still didn't have enough Star Wars in your life, then Battlefront let you fight as if you were a stormtrooper on the battlefield using all the equipment that you've seen in the movies, taking elements from Battlefield and combining them with the spectacle of the beloved original creations of George Lucas and combining them into a beautiful game that would be rebooted a decade later by Electronic Arts with worse results. But what really made 2004 shine for FPS games was Half-Life 2. Valve returned to the genre with a game that combined cinematic storytelling that never really took away control from your character, with some really great performances, memorable characters, excellent action, and a physics system that made a linear shooter a lot more fun than you think it would be, mostly thanks to its base weapon, the gravity gun, a weapon that could pick up anything in a world that wasn't nailed down or a character until the final level and tossed around for fun. And along with Half-Life 2 came the realization that the digital age was indeed upon us, for the game needed Steam, Valve's own proprietary distribution network, to function, to be validated and to be verified. Without it, the game was a bit unplayable. And through Half-Life 2, the platform grew, expanded, extended, and became what it is today. The underlying technology of Half-Life 2, the source engine, would itself prove to be quite flexible and useful, being used to create a sandbox mod called Gary's Mod that very same year, which everybody has fun with even today, and made some guy named Gary a millionaire eventually once he started selling it as a separate game, as allowed by Valve. And the engine was also used for a rushed, unfinished, and very buggy Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, a game that many have described as Deus Ex with vampires, a masterpiece of atmosphere, immersive setting, open-ended gameplay, and sheer style. It just oozes it from every pore. The gothic, the dark, the brooding, the fun of being an immortal vampire in a world of darkness. Although it would require a decade of community patching to be brought to a shape that you can call fully functional, Bloodlines was and still is one of the greatest RPGs ever made. Sadly, it would be the last game Troika would ever make. Bloodlines was not a commercial success, and it cost a lot to make, with a lot of pain and effort poured into it. In a few months, one of the most creative game studios that ever existed would vanish. And since I am in the RPG sector, I will throw Sacred a bone as well and say that for a while it was the best game inspired by Diablo 2, but then the competition sort of heated up a bit. If it was strategy games that you wanted, well, this year brought you the great Ground Control 2, a game that, although was very good in its own right, was a bit overshadowed by the juggernaut that was Rome Total War, riding a bit of a wave from the Gladiator movie that was still being quoted by everyone at the time, it applied the creative assembly formula to the Roman Empire, combining a turn-based map where you would manage an empire, where you would raise armies, develop cities, engage in diplomatic relationships, and a real-time tactics component where you would lead vast armies in a simulation that was deep enough for its time that you would see it quite often used on the Discovery Channel for various historically themed shows about ancient generals. To a lot of people, it is still the finest game of the series in terms of depth, theme, and the amount of fun you could have from trying to capture most of Europe for the glory of the Senate and the people of Rome. It would get a direct sequel. Not a lot of people liked it. It had issues. And what was the game of 2004, you may ask? Well, it can't really be anything other than World of Warcraft. We still live in its shadow. The entire MMO genre was absorbed by it. It molded what people expected from the genre, or at least what companies thought people wanted. World of Warcraft would lead to a lot of wasted effort to outdo it on the part of pretty much everyone in the industry, including Blizzard themselves. They tried, years later, when they weren't busy trying to keep the servers alive because there were just too many people trying to play it. World of Warcraft would bring a lot of joy to millions and millions of people, and those were the paying ones. Unofficially, there still are a lot of private servers, but the majority would still gravitate towards the actual game, towards the original, towards the unending mass of sheer enjoyment that World of Warcraft gave them. Well, at least until Cataclysm and the Panda thing, but they're coming back for the war that's reignited in 2018. With that, we end 2004. Next year, well, probably won't be as exciting as this one, unless you really like first-person shooters. Goodbye.